Hello, everybody. I'm Cliff Corbett. You all know me as Mr. Cliff. Here with me is my brother, Will Corbett. He is a history major at Coastal Carolina University, and he's heard about what I'm talking about. And we decided that what we do is every now and then we'll record ourselves having a discussion about the topics at hand, and we're just going to call this the Corbett Corner. So, Will, say hi.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
Okay, and let's jump right into this. So, first and foremost, y'all been talking about Emily Dickinson and the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. It's a lot to go through. My brother has a lot of information and knowledge about the Declaration, and I want to give him the chance to share some of his knowledge. So, Will, if you wouldn't mind.
Sorry, I had to take a drink of water there. But, well, the Declaration of Independence is what some historians and I call the best breakup letter of all time. It was basically a saying to, no, Great Britain, we don't want to be with you anymore. We're going to go do our own thing. But an important thing to understand is it didn't just roll around to 1776 and we just said, well, Great Britain, it's been fun, but we're going to bail. Well, it started really after the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, when the British Empire fought with France over control of the North American continent, amongst a couple other European countries, but they're not important right now. But anyway, long story short, the British won with the help of the colonials, and but it was a very costly war. And in order to pay for the reparations of winning the war, the British government started to break an old rule they had with the colonies known as solitary neglect. And solitary neglect basically means you're going to be basically under our realm of influence and loosely under our control, but we're not going to impose any taxes on you. We're going to kind of basically let you do what you want. However, they decided that in order to pay for the reparations from the previous war, that they were going to, in essence, remove solitary neglect and begin taxing the colonies, which is where you get stuff like the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and the Townsend Act, Townsend Act comes later, but anyway, all these sort of acts that the colonists were just opposed to vehemently, and in several cases were actually successful in getting repealed, but the problem is British Parliament and the King were getting rather upset and kept on pushing act after act, and the colonists kept on becoming more and more unruly. Eventually, when 1775 rolls around, Boston basically explodes and goes up in an uproar, and there's actual fighting goes on. There's Bunker Hill, Lexington, and Concord. And because of that, the British government is basically up in arms. They want to basically bring down the iron fist onto the rebellious little colonies. And before the Declaration of Independence is signed, the Continental Congress gets together and they basically say, all right, we're going to try one last time to basically have them reinstate salutary neglect and have them let us be our own independent, autonomous part of the British Empire. That was called the Olive Branch Petition, to which it was thoroughly rejected by the King and Parliament. And because of this, they decided, well, time to go do our own thing. Of course, some colonial leaders like Samuel Adams, they were pro-independence from day one, but the majority of them were really hoping that they didn't have to leave Great Britain, but between bowing down to a government where they had no representation in or leaving, they chose to leave, and that's kind of where you get America from today.
Well, here's the question that I think about and we talked about this some in class, and I want your opinion on this. I would argue that the Declaration of Independence is not only revolutionary for America, but I'd say revolutionary for the world at this point in time. Because what you got to think about is the fact that throughout the world, monarchy and singular leadership for countries was just a norm. And for a country to step out and say, you know what, we're done with this, we're going to run our own system, this was a big deal. And wasn't it true, at least from your perspective, that a lot of other countries saw what we did in America and sort of said, oh gosh, that's a great idea, let's do it ourselves?
To an extent. There were several countries that were just happy to see Great Britain get the finger, like France, because they were even more monarchical than the British. Because keep in mind, the British didn't have like an absolute monarchy at the time. They had a constitutional monarchy, meaning the king didn't have all the power. At this time, the king had he was the head executive. But the British Parliament was like the main legislative body in Britain, but the problem was the colonials didn't have any representation. Though the Declaration of Independence did go on to inspire many others, like the one I can think of right now is in 1789. The Dutch also listed a declaration of similar note. And even during the French Revolution, though the contents of it are different, the many declarations of the rights of man by the whatever you can call the government in France during the French Revolution, also took inspiration from Thomas Jefferson, though keep in mind Thomas Jefferson did take a lot of his ideas from Enlightenment leaders like John Locke. However, he changed John Locke's life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
You know, and that's something interesting, and that takes from an English aspect, too. That changing of the phrase, you know, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness versus the life, liberty, and property. You got to love that Thomas Jefferson was so young when he wrote this, especially considering the day and age of today versus then. He was still so young to be writing such an important document, and linguistically and literally, it was very powerful. Do you think that had a hand in him becoming third president of the United States?
Well, definitely. The fact that, got to keep in mind, Thomas Jefferson wasn't just the writer of the Declaration of Independence. He had a heavy hand in also the Constitutional Convention, Continental Congress. So he's been around. He's one of the people that everybody across the country recognized. And also Thomas Jefferson is one of the people that really establishes one of the first political parties. The Federalists are sort of a party, but they don't like parties, so they're not going to really talk about it. And so Thomas Jefferson's like, I like the idea of parties, so I'm going to make one and bump you guys. But, yeah, as far as Thomas Jefferson goes, I'm not sure how much his age went into it, but more of his education. But you got to keep in mind, like, it's a different era back then. Like, if you go back and read, like, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, and other writing of that time, and then you realize that stuff like the Federalist Papers, they were meant to be read by a plain, simple peasant farmer in upstate New York, and they were expected to get that, as opposed to, like, statesmen, like congressmen today would look over half of the Federalist Papers and go, I don't understand this gibberish.
And then move on, yeah. But I think one thing that I want to definitely ask you before we close this out, and then you can ask me anything you want, but I think the one thing that appeals to me is, you know, we talked about when you're writing, your audience is everything. You got to know who you're talking to. And the Declaration of Independence was written as a letter to King George saying, hey, you know, we're done with this. But it was also intended for the American people. How do you think that difference in audience was important to both, first of all, the King of England, how he responded, and then the American people. How do you think that audience shift worked? Because it's very hard to be at the same time an essay of hope for the American people, but also an essay of, farewell to the King of England.
Well, it was more than just a farewell to the King of England. It was like, you got to keep in mind, they were also pretty ticked with Parliament too, because Parliament was the one that was passing acts. The King was just giving his little seal of approval to it. Though the King was an easy target because it's like one person to point all of your anger at, and they did keep, like, the thing that Thomas Jefferson had to keep in mind when writing this, and especially when it comes to audience as far as the American people, was Thomas Jefferson is a Virginian. Back then, they didn't think of themselves like, oh, I'm American. They thought of themselves like, oh, I'm a Virginian, oh, I'm a South Carolinian, oh, I'm a New Yorker. So they didn't really have a unified identity, and Americans really wouldn't have that till really would start to see that evolve after the War of 1812 and then even further after the Civil War.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, and so he had to basically write this thing that would basically appeal to all tastes of Americans, and there were some that they agreed with some of the sentiment, but they didn't want to go off with the Tories, the Loyalists, that really didn't agree with, that really didn't want to leave in the first place, and were adamant about whatever, like, we'll pay the taxes, we just want to stay, but they're about roughly a third of the population.
So, wait, hold on. Would you say, because I know you've said this before, you've said that the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War was more of a tactical document more than it was a binding constitutional amendment. Would you say that the Declaration of Independence was more of a tactical document too, or do you think that it actually holds merit?
I would say both, because the thing is, one, it's basically saying, hey, we're not just going to be a bunch of 13 squabbling different separate countries, because that was what some people wanted. Like, we are going to be one unified front, or at this time a confederation, because we're still operating under the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution hasn't been written yet. And so it was basically, we're all in this together. Nobody sing a High School Musical song, please. And basically telling King George III and Parliament, like, we're done. We've tried, but, like, we need time apart. It's just not going to work out. We're going to have to leave. And, of course, King George was absolutely furious when he read this, because he didn't like his policies being questioned. One of the problems with a lot of English monarchs, especially after the Magna Carta, is they get very sensitive about their power being questioned, especially since they no longer have all the power. And you see, there's three separate English wars, like back to back to back, about the king and how much power he can or can't have. And so basically, it's a big slap in the face to these guys. Like, we fought for these colonies, and now they're up and leaving. What the heck?
So, in a way, you kind of feel bad for King George there. In a way.
Well, they also got to consider that it's not just like, hey, what's up with these taxes? We're leaving. It was, hey, what's up with these taxes? Don't do that. Here, we're going to have to do some boycotts. We're going to have to do our own thing. We're going to have some smuggling going on. We're going to have a few tea parties. Not just Boston Tea Party. There were other ones that went along, too. Boston was just the most famous one.
Yeah.
And then they tried to seize, like, arms and ammunition from the colonists. And then they're like, after that, like, Continental Congress got together, and it's like, okay, the Continental Congress basically got together, and they said, okay, we're going to try one more time to be autonomous within the British Empire, continue salutary neglect. We'll send it over and see how that goes. It was the Olive Branch Petition, as stated before. When that didn't work, they're like, all right, it's now time to leave.
That's fascinating. But I think that's all the historical background that we have for now. Literary-wise, the Declaration, in my opinion, is one of the most important documents ever written because it was the foundation for what makes our country so unique, and it was inspirational to the revolutions and independence movements for several other nations. And as you pointed out, France and other countries like it saw what we did and said, hey, if American could do it, so can we. And I think that's not only inspiring, but there's a reason why this document, even if it was just a tactical move, is still held as one of the most important documents ever written. But I think that wraps up this Corbett Corner. We'll see you again for the next one. I'm Cliff.
And Will.
And we'll see you next time.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, and that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain what's that word there?
Unalienable.
With certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is in the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.